Peace, Black family. So I was watching a Breakfast Club interview with Viola Davis, and she said something very interesting.
You know, you got to be ambitious. Sometimes you got to be ambitious about rest.
Yeah.
About nurturing your soul and your heart. You know, they say that the only way to treat being overwhelmed is to do absolutely nothing. It's in those spaces that you find who you are, even that you connect with your life.
And don't feel guilty about it. Sometimes we feel
Yeah.
like if you're not being active and working, it's a bad thing, but you need that to like refresh yourself.
It's trauma based. It's trauma based. It's trauma based. You don't feel like you deserve to rest.
So that's what they say, being busy is a trauma response a lot of times. So that's what they say, being busy is a trauma response a lot of times.
So with that being said, the definition of trauma can vary, right? Like trauma can be verbal abuse as a child. Your parents devaluing you, your mother telling you, you know, how dark skinned you are, how ugly you are, how you look like your daddy. You know, it can be physical abuse from one parent. It can be a parent dying at an early age, a sibling dying at an early age. Trauma can be physical, obviously. Trauma can be sexual abuse. Trauma can vary. There's no one way to say I've been traumatized, right? Trauma can even be learning about your history. It is traumatic for some people to learn about the slave trade. Now, this doesn't negate the fact that we should learn about it, because it is a way to learn about who we are today, right? And to elevate from that way of thinking, so you know we can see how we be enslaved minded if we just go back to slavery. That's not saying we shouldn't learn about slavery. You know, trauma can vary. There is no one way to say a person is or has been traumatized, okay? It can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be sexual, it can be even abandonment issues from one parent, right? So all these ways, all these categories can be formed as trauma. Now, with that being said, a lot of us mask our trauma behind materialistic things. Oh, I got this, I got that. You know, I'm out here getting it. You know, we opening up 3 or 4 businesses online. We getting this money. We always in the gym. We always at the bar. We always at somebody's yoga studio. We always, you know what I'm saying, online scrolling for hours. You know, just looking at things that don't mean nothing, trivial things in our life. We always got our bottle in our hand. We always drinking. We always smoking. We're always doing these things instead of sitting down and actually dealing with the trauma of my parents. Parent abandoned me. I lost my brother at a young age. You know, my father devalued me at a young age. You know, I didn't know my father. Instead of dealing with those traumas, we mask them behind the idea of always being busy. Always, you know, using escapism to get away from that. And you can't grow as an individual or as a community unless you deal with those traumas on an individual level, on a cultural level, on a social level. You cannot move anywhere as a people unless you deal with those traumas. And a lot of us just keep masking it. And you know who keep giving us the ammunition to mask and to hide our traumas? White supremacy. Because they don't never ever want you to advance your thinking as an African. They want you to spend all your time in the bars, spending your money with them, because understand, economics is not just about the money. Economics is an emotional thing. You buy things that make you feel good. So if you're dealing with something or you're not dealing with something that's traumatic that happened to you as a child, the best way to get over it is to mask it with something that makes you feel good. Economics has a huge part to do with feelings. Do not get stuck in the idea of what they teach you in economics class. They teach you scarcity and all that bullshit. Don't get caught up in it. That's white people mumbo jumbo. Economics has a lot to do with the things you relate to and the things that make you feel good. You gonna buy that new Beyonce album because you know Beyonce, when you put it on, you gonna feel good. You're going to buy these jewelry and all these things like that because when you put it on, it makes you feel good. You want to go on a trip because that trip, when you go to wherever you're going to go on that trip, it's going to make you feel good. You're going to forget about your problems. Economics has a lot to do with emotions and the relationship to a thing. Please don't get caught up in mumbo jumbo Europeanism. Economics has to do with relationships and emotions. But with that being said, Europeans are always going to give us the things that mask our trauma because they never want us to remember ourselves. Remember means to bring back together. They never want us to come back together and be whole in ourselves. So although the avalanche of trauma has been created by white people through the slave trade, right? The ancestral behavior that we have amongst ourselves with uncles molesting nieces and cousins doing things to cousins, that all comes from slavery, colonization. We know that. And now that avalanche has been set into place, right? And now it's steamrolling in the black community. And now we traumatize each other, not understanding where it really actually came from. And now, with that traumatization happening in our community, we use the things that Europeans provide to us to escape that trauma. And they make money off of our trauma. Through the movies, through the music, through the alcohol, through the illegal drugs they bring into our communities. They make money off of our trauma. And we just keep running from it. We become gym rats. We in the gym every day. Not saying there's nothing wrong with being healthy. Not saying there's nothing wrong with being in shape. We on our phone for hours scrolling. Talking on the phone even. Just talking on the phone about mindless things all day. Yeah, and then that happened, and then that happened, and then that happened. That is a form of escapism. Because the first time you alone, the first time you by yourself, you feeling depressed. Sometimes even when you out with people, you feeling depressed. But you hiding it behind laughter. You hiding it behind jokes. You get what I'm saying? A lot of people deal with reactionary formation, which means they really depressed. They really going through something, but they gonna hide it behind being happy. That's why when you see people commit suicide, their family members or the closest people around them always say, you would never thought they would kill themselves. They was always smiling and joking and laughing. Like, what? I was just with that person. How could they do something like that? Because they hiding their trauma. We gotta stop running from our trauma because this also impacts our relationships. We wonder why we can't be in happy adult relationships. Intimacy escapes us because we hide from our trauma. We don't run to that motherfucker. We hide from it. And when you hiding from something, you can never be truly who you are. You have to learn to accept those things. That's why the ancient African ancestors always said, African man, African woman, know thyself. Know your triggers. Know what hurt you. Know your trauma. Know thyself. And that shit is gonna hurt to go through it. To think in your head, man, my parents really didn't love me the way that I wanted them to love me. They gave me all the clothes and all the shoes, but they never really shared time with me. They never really had real experiences with me. That's gonna hurt. That's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt to think, dang, my mama knew I was being molested by her boyfriend and she just kept him around and let him beat me, and that's gonna hurt. That's gonna hurt. Dang, my family member did this to me. It's gonna hurt. But you gotta know yourself. You gotta know your triggers. You gotta go through that. You gotta walk through that. Understand life is not always about sunny days. You gotta walk through that rain. You gotta walk through that rain to get to that sunny day sometime. And we don't wanna do that. And we can't grow unless we want to deal with those traumas. Hiding stuff from people only means that you're hiding it from yourself. That's just the reality of it. So, hopefully, this message hits somebody and you can sit down and analyze yourself and your past, because in order to know who you are today, you got to know your past. You got to deal with those triggers, because everything you are today, who you are today, comes from past experiences. You can even look at that as a social history. You can look at how we all speak English, right? Because we were colonized by the English. If you speak Creole, you was colonized by the French. If you speak Spanish, you was colonized by the Spanish or enslaved by the Spanish, right? That's your history. Everything you are today comes from your history. And if you don't want to sit back and look at that history, whether it be traumatic or not, you're not going to grow. You're going to be stagnant. You're not going nowhere as an individual or as a group. And when we talk about whether it be Christianity or our cultures and all those things like that, we get offended. Oh man, don't tell me I'm Christian because the white man, I'm Christian. And we find all these escapisms to deal with Christianity. But I'm not here to talk about Christianity. I'm here to say, man, deal with your shit. Because we can't move nowhere as a people. It's fucked up that, and that it's messed up that I'm running into people dang near 40 years old. And they still getting triggered by little things because we not dealing with our trauma. We hiding it. We smoking ourselves to death, drinking ourselves to death, shopping ourselves to death, clubbing ourselves to death, traveling ourselves to death because we not dealing with this trauma, man. Anyway, until next time, think black, stay black, love black, support black, and that's real African black power.
Yeah.
About nurturing your soul, you got to be ambitious.
Wow.
Which is awesome director Francis Lawrence, awesome role, the villain role. But you know what? Everyone's always saying, you know, you got to be ambitious. Sometimes you got to be ambitious about rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
About nurturing your soul and your heart. You know, they say that the only way to treat being overwhelmed is to do absolutely nothing. It's in those spaces that you find who you are, even that you connect with your life.
And don't feel guilty about it. Sometimes we feel like if you're not being active and working, it's a bad thing, but you need that to like refresh yourself.
It's trauma based. You don't feel like you deserve to rest.
So that's what they say, being busy is a trauma response a lot of times.
It is.
I was going to ask you about, with the book too, like you gave so much of yourself in your book. Was that exhausting or exhilarating?
Both.
Okay.